Our guest today, Judy Mayo, is an advisory director for Argyle. She's been in-house for 3 different companies and done that law firm thing. Judy brings that in-house experience to help companies marry design and substance together, bringing a lot of passion, a lot of practical guidance to her work, as you'll soon find out. I'm Brock Romanek, today on Zippy Point. So Judy, the CEO and NEO's pay that still comprises a good chunk of the proxy, and that's there, it's the part of the proxy that typically shareholders are interested in the most. And since pay programs can be so complicated sometimes, the use of design can really help bring that to life. So what have you seen? What would you recommend in this area?
There is a lot of variation in terms of how companies show their pay mix. It is probably the most complicated part of the proxy statement. And as you said, the part that most, especially institutional investors, are interested in seeing. So it's important for companies to be able to convey this information as clearly and succinctly as possible while telling the company's story about the compensation package. There is absolutely no one size fits all. Each company's compensation program is so different that the way you tell the story naturally has to reflect the key points that the company wants to convey about their compensation package. So I think for every company, the key elements that should be reflected in design that's important to communicate are the components of your compensation package. What are the various elements that go into it? Which are short-term? Which ones are long-term? Which ones, what's the vehicle? Is it paid out in cash? Is it paid out in equity? Which ones are fixed and which ones are risk-based, performance-based? And all those, there's so many elements that go into it that good design allows a reader to very easily understand all those components. Sometimes you can't do it all in one place. Sometimes it just gets too complicated to try to reflect all those components visually. But in a series of design elements, you can tell a good story. So I'll show a couple of examples of companies that have done a really good job. So this first page is from the FedEx proxy statement. This is Alana Griffin and her team. Here in the proxy summary of their proxy statement, they present visually their compensation program in general. They don't distinguish between the CEO pay package and the NEO pay package. They do that later on in the CD&A, but here I really like how they visually showed each of the components of their compensation program. They delineate which are short-term and which are long-term, the percentage that each component represents in the entire compensation package. And they also describe a little bit about the components, how the award levels are set, and what the performance goals are. So it's a very nice introduction to the compensation program. Later on in their CD&A, they go into a lot of detail about each component of their compensation program. So here you'll see for each NEO, they set forth the components of their each NEO's program: the base salary, performance, stock options, restricted stock, and another performance award here. So you can compare for each NEO visually how much of each component is represented in their pay package. On the following page, there's another view for each NEO, which is short-term and which is long-term. So by presenting it this way, you not only understand how they've divided short and long-term compensation, but you can compare it among each of the NEOs. The next example is Huntington Bank, and this is Libby Moore and team. They have several pay mix graphics that drive home different points about their compensation program. So the first one is, this is on the CD&A. They present circle charts that show the various components, base, short-term, and long-term, so you understand the tenors. And they also indicate inside what is at risk. And they do one chart for the CEO and one for the NEO, so you could compare side by side how much for the CEO versus the other NEOs are at risk and how their components compare. Later on in the proxy statement, Huntington Bank goes into more detail about their compensation package. Again, because compensation packages tend to be complex, sometimes you can't represent all of the information in one graphic. So further in their CD&A, Huntington Bank has a graphic that shows for the CEO and for the other NEOs, some more detail about their packages, base salary versus annual incentive versus long-term. So you understand the tenor of all of these, what's short-term and what's long-term. Here you'll see that all of these components are at risk. And finally, the narrative on the right gives detail about the purpose of each component and key features. Further on in the CDNA, they go into even more detail about the long-term incentive program because they have 3 vehicles for it. They have PSUs, RSUs, and stock options. And again, for both the CEO and the NEO, they visually depict what percentage of the long-term awards are represented by each vehicle. And they give some details about vesting and performance measures here. So the combination of all the graphics for Huntington Bank allows the reader to understand at a sort of a 50,000-foot level, and then drilling down to various features of their compensation package in a way that's easy to understand. For the 2019 annual meeting of Microsoft, this is where this comes from, their proxy for the 2019 annual meeting, I really enjoyed the graphic that they presented for their compensation structure. There is a ton of information in this graphic. Again, this is something that works for Microsoft. It may not work for other companies depending on the composition of the compensation package. But what Microsoft attempted to do here is show in one-stop shopping visual everything you need to know about their compensation package. It has the pay mix here. And again, this is in general, not for any particular NEO. The various elements, salary, cash incentive, performance stock, and other stock awards. For each type of award, it gives details about the metrics and the measures and how they are paid out. Same thing for their cash incentive. It breaks down the components, the metrics, and the measures. There is a ton of information in this one graphic. I really enjoy it for that purpose. And finally, I wanted to show what CSX has done in its last proxy statement. So the CSX team is Mark Austin and Ann Holman. And what they did is a variation of what we call compensation scorecards that are being used increasingly more in the CDNA to show for each NEO what their payout was for the reported year. The variation that CSX has done here is this is their targeted compensation mix. So in the CDNA, it describes for each NEO their target pay mix, again, giving each component. They also give dollar amounts for each of their components, as well as describing what accomplishments will give rise to a payout for each NEO. And I really like that because what's important for investors should be what has the NEO done to deserve their payout at the end of the year. You want to know what the target was, but you also know why they ended up getting the payout they did. And this is a nice way to show that. So there are a lot of different ways that you can show visually what your pay mix is. And I think it is important for a company to have at least several graphics, at least one, showing what the pay mix is, the compensation program, so that the reader can easily understand on one page, at least from a 50,000 foot view, what elements go into their compensation program. What's at risk is important. The vehicles are important. Short-term versus long-term is important. And if they could do that in one or more than one graphics, it's a great way to communicate that to their investors in a way that's easily understood.
Yeah, I mean, the examples you've shown are remarkable. At some point, I would imagine the SEC would mandate some sort of minimal graphic, or at least pressure from investors on companies to provide it, because it is so much easier to understand and what these companies have done and what.
Yeah, and I think this is a really great example of a picture's worth 1,000 words, because you can write paragraphs on your compensation program, and you typically have to anyway to describe all the detail. But unless you have it in one place for the reader to understand the comprehensive package, the reader might get a little lost and confused.
Yeah, they're pretty detailed.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Judy.